Welcome to the She Said Privacy, He Said Security podcast. Like any good marriage, we will debate, evaluate, and sometimes quarrel about how privacy and security impact business in the 21st century.
Hi, Jody Daniels here. I'm the founder and CEO of Clover Advisors, a certified women's privacy consultancy. I'm a privacy consultant and certified informational privacy professional, providing practical privacy advice to overwhelmed companies.
Hello, I'm Justin Daniels. I am a shareholder and corporate M&A and tech transaction lawyer at the law firm Baker Donaldson, advising companies in the deployment and scaling of technology. Since data is critical to every transaction, I help clients make informed business decisions while managing data privacy and cybersecurity risk, and when needed, I lead the legal cyber data breach response brigade.
And this episode is brought to you by Ding. Clover Advisors. We help companies to comply with data privacy laws and establish customer trust so that they can grow and nurture integrity. We work with companies in a variety of fields, including technology, e-commerce, professional services, and digital media. In short, we use data privacy to transform the way companies do business. Together, we're creating a future where there's greater trust between companies and consumers. To learn more and to check out our best-selling book, Data Reimagined, Building Trust One Bite at a Time, visit redcloveradvisors.com. Well, hello.
Yes, I think the pollen count in Atlanta is only, 40,000?
That's why my car is a bumblebee, because I drive a black car, and then it looks like a bumblebee with all the yellow on it.
As it should, considering you have a Steeler license plate.
That's your fault. And then when we walk outside on the deck, there's a little pathway that has no yellow on it. Anyone, if you don't like pollen, don't come to Atlanta in the spring.
Indeed. But speaking about our guest today, I think it's interesting how our community works, because both of us are friends with Keith Novak, who introduced us to Jeff Matalski, and then Jeff introduced me to our guest today, and we are joined by Svetlana Braunscheidel, who is the General Counsel and VP of Operations for PNG Cyber. Her experience spans executive operations, business development, legal, and national security fields. Svetlana, welcome. How are you today?
Hi, thank you for having me. Thank you for making me do something that is extremely outside my comfort zone. So we'll see how I feel after this podcast is done, but I'm okay thus far. And I love your little trajectory of who we met when. And obviously, Jeff was my first major hire for PNG last year, and I think we got really lucky with that hire, and we've done really well since. So, shout out to Jeff.
Well, we're excited that you're here, and what a great example of it is okay to try something new. We all have to push ourselves and challenge, and we are excited to talk to you. And we always start with understanding how you got to where you are today. So tell us a little bit about your career evolution.
So this is going to be slightly long, cut whatever you need to. But so basically, I always wanted to be a lawyer. So I came to the United States a month before I turned 10. And initially, I loved this country. I thought I was going to be the president. Somebody rudely told me that I couldn't be because the Constitution said so. So I came home crying. I said, "What's the Constitution?" So I read it and I said, "Who wrote this?" And my dad said, "A bunch of blipping attorneys." And I said, "Okay, great. I'll be a blipping attorney." So at a very young age, I always knew I was going to be an attorney. Initially, I really wanted to go into banking finance. I really love personal finance and reading credit card terms and conditions. At some point, I graduated high school early. I graduated undergrad early. And to get into law school, obviously, is very expensive. And I didn't have, because I was still kind of young and I didn't have the support, I ended up joining the military. So I enlisted at 20 as a cryptologic Russian linguist analyst. Russian didn't come in until they assigned me that language a little bit later. So I ended up doing Russian language training, despite the fact that I am Russian. So that kind of worked out at the Defense Language Institute Foreign Language Center in Monterey, California. And then I did cryptology training in San Angelo, and thankfully got my orders changed from Anchorage, Alaska to San Antonio, Texas, which would have really impacted my life because Alaska does not have a law school and the mission was very different there than in San Antonio. So anyway, I get stationed in San Antonio. Thankfully got accepted to the one law school in San Antonio. had a really supportive command and branch chief. They let me do both law school and my military component at the same time. And I guess I should have mentioned this, but when you're a linguist, the military farms you out to the National Security Agency. So I was on a billet for NSA, started out working Russian organized crime, and at some point transitioned to Russian cybercrime. So I was doing that in law school and clerking at USAA, thinking I was still going to be a banking and finance attorney. A lot of things happened, and this job really made me realize how much I loved the national security space and cybersecurity specifically. So I ended up getting out of the military, finishing my JD, got an LLM in national security from Georgetown. Really wasn't sure if I was going to do illicit finance and cyber, and ended up getting an opportunity to start out in the private sector and law firms as a dedicated cybersecurity and data privacy attorney. So I did that for a few years at a couple law firms, and I really loved it. And in the middle of a transition to another law firm, I had a lunch with our current SVP, and he said, "Why don't you come and be our general counsel?" And so that was almost 2.5 years ago, and here we are.
What a cool and fascinating story. Do we actually have to talk about all these other things today?
I told you she was really cool. Svetlana, you were the only one who didn't realize this would be cool. So
I can re-say it in Russian, and then time can be called, and then we'll be done.
For anyone listening who would like that, you can reach out directly and she will translate for you.
Yeah, there we go.
But anyway, given your role at your current firm, PNG, can you talk to us a little bit about any kind of specific trends you're seeing as it relates to cyber attacks in the last 12 to 18 months, given the variety of use cases that come across your desk?
So I'm going to be honest, I did what I think a lot of vice presidents do, is I delegated this down to my team, who does all of the work and is way smarter and knows way more than I'll ever know. So I do obviously oversee a lot of the high level engagements, but they're doing all of the core work and seeing this on a daily basis. So a lot of the commentary was, the last year specifically seemed to be the year of critical vulnerabilities. So they were seeing a lot of unpatched network appliances being exploited, alarming rates. Also the time between vulnerabilities, the discovery and exploitation thereof has significantly shortened. So it's becoming obviously more imperative for companies to really focus on their, programs. There was also SIM swapping and search engine optimization, which we've seen. Obviously, SIM swapping is a lot more targeted. Essentially, that means somebody has to go to a cellular provider, pretend to be you, and then if appropriate checks are not followed, a clone of the phone is then provided to this individual. So obviously, that is being usually targeted in kind of like the technology and research sectors, because they're really trying to obtain a lot of that, IP information. And then search engine optimization, I think we all know, we type in whatever we want to search. The first few things that pop up is usually what we click on. Oftentimes, those could be the alternate websites that are being created by threat actors that are then obtaining your information. So, all of this being, in mind, clearly there's still a lot of intelligence still being used by threat actors to try to continue manipulating, companies and individuals.
Justin, does any of that surprise you?
No, considering I've seen a few SIM swaps myself, not at all. I think what's more interesting from what Svetlana is saying is the time between the reconnaissance and the infiltration to the time when they start engaging in their mayhem has shortened. So you have less time to figure it out before the threat actor's in, and now they're actually going to actively engage in some type of cyber mayhem.
Well, that's comforting. Now, as the She Said privacy of our podcast, I always like to ask my privacy-related questions. And as an organization that works with a lot of CISOs, are you seeing CISOs having more responsibilities for privacy in their organizations?
So I'm going to say a very high level yes, caveat, right? Because, I think that whether it's a CISO or CIO or whatever role that's still being occupied by an individual that assists with this component of compliance within an organization, I think there's still a little bit of departure of accountability. And the reason I say that is despite the fact that we talk about this regularly and almost ad nauseum. And so therefore, I think, cyber and privacy is a constant in our space. I still think that it is very new to some companies, especially smaller companies. And that is not the focus until something blows up in their face. And so I think the reality of the situation is, unless you are in a regulated industry and something is being essentially force fed to you by the SEC or whomever, it is, yes, top of mind, but maybe not on a sufficiently day-to-day basis until there's an issue. And then we have, these conversations.
Are you hearing any of them talk about any of the privacy laws? I'm just curious because we have, as of this recording, 5 effective privacy laws right now, several more states coming, and they've been on a flurry of passing new legislation. And I'm just interested to know, are these security professionals speaking about the privacy laws and that they, when they're going to actually implement or tackle and do something might be different, but I'm just interested to know, are they even aware of the plethora of privacy laws that we have?
I think I want to say no, to be honest. I think majority of the internal stakeholders that are playing a role in an incident, either, pre, during, even post, they feel like that is being outsourced or being taken care of by somebody else, right? Which is why we often have tri-party agreements and outside counsel is leading that discussion. Hey, be aware, and this is where you're headquartered, and this is how you may be impacted by, the current legislation that has been passed. There's a high level overview of understanding that is important, but especially, again, mid-sized to smaller businesses, I think they just, that is something they're either outsourcing or they expect somebody else to lead the discussion. Obviously, with larger corporations, I think that is very different. That is not majority of our client base.
I appreciate you sharing.
So, Svetlana, kind of getting a little bit more tactical, because our audience may have never been through the start of an investigation when you have a cyber event. And I was wondering if you could talk our audience through a little bit. So if I get a call about a cyber incident and I need to have a forensic investigation done yesterday, walk me through the steps that I would need to take to engage a firm such as yours. And what are some of the real important things that you have to get right in the contract, or you could have real problems down the line?
Yes, thank you for that question. And obviously it will vary depending on how you are, one, finding out about the incident and the initial reporting mechanism you're using. And the reason I say that is because oftentimes, if you have cybersecurity insurance policy, there is already a kind of an outline of what you need to do, right? Whether you report it directly to your adjuster, and then the adjuster calls you and then obtains the necessary information and tells you, hey, thanks, we already have panel providers, which essentially means we have created partnerships in place where we've negotiated rates, how we want things done, a speed of response, all of that stuff. And so we're going to either tell you here are, panel providers and you can select, or we will elect for you. And we will schedule an initial call with the relevant parties. The relevant parties is always, at least PNG or, one of our competitors, outside counsel. Sometimes they use another party if you need threat actor negotiations, despite the fact that PNG does that. Sometimes, the adjusters or other relevant parties want to use a different party associated with that. And then sometimes you also have MSSPs involved, right? So they say, we'll schedule a call with all of the relevant parties. We all get on. There's a lot of people. And then we ask the client to walk us through the incident. Once we have an understanding of what the incident looks like, we present a scope of work, an SOW, and an MSA, a master services agreement. These documents have already usually been pre-negotiated and vetted by the relevant parties on the call, aka the outside counsel and the adjuster. So they already looked at these documents, they're good with it, they're good with the rates, they're good with the terms. And so usually as long as they think that the budget is within their perception of fairness for the scope of work, it's all very quick. We usually send those engagement materials within 30 minutes post initial call, usually vetted and approved within 30 minutes to an hour. So everything is being executed within 2 hours. And then we obtain the necessary credentials to start assisting the insured with restoration recovery, collecting the necessary artifacts to really know what happened within the network.
So Svetlana, is it fair to say that when you get people who call you who've never dealt with your firm before, who have never had an incident before and practiced, they can lose a lot of time in having to negotiate agreements as opposed to having them pre-vetted. And one of the advantages of working with someone like your firm and you is you kind of take care of that for them because you already have the tri-party agreement. You already have the language, because if we don't have privilege from the outset with outside counsel, any kind of investigative report that you do would not be privileged, and in a litigation would be subject to disclosure. Would you mind talking a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I'll talk about that, but also I think the contract aspect of it aside, even if you don't, have pre-negotiated panel vendor agreements kind of in place, I think generally speaking, reaching out to a vendor who already has a working relationship with all the relevant parties speeds all of this up significantly faster, right? But as far as the actual contracts go, yes, we've been in a position where we were not considered, a panel vendor, or we did not have a relationship either with the insurance company or the outside counsel. And, obviously I'm on the receiving end of all of the red lines. Sometimes that can take days, because if you have not already put something in place and you've agreed to the damages clause, and you're working with a larger company that has its own in-house counsel team, so the outside counsel's review then gets sent to in-house counsel, that gets kicked back, and all at this point in time you're losing artifacts, logs are being cleared, the company is, if it's a ransomware attack or whatever, is basically at a standstill. That being said, usually if it is an urgent situation, that is being negotiated while the work is being done, right? We very rarely wait to, sometimes if a client says, I'm going to sign this, but I just need to get access to DocuSign or whatever, right? We have that written understanding. So we're not going to be at a standstill for 72 hours just because somebody, for example, can't access their email and provide signature. But obviously having all this in place significantly shortens the amount of time, and yes, puts everything in a tri-party agreement under privilege, and all of the parties that previously worked together before on, dozens of occasions, and therefore they understand expectations, they know how to set the expectations, and they understand, the tone to carry with relevant clients.
The theme here I hear is preparation. Having everything in line is always better than waiting to the last minute. This is true in all parts of our life. One of the other big areas that people might be influenced to start preparing is companies who have to deal with the SEC rules. And interested to know, are you seeing any behavior shifts in, I should really get my cyber hygiene in a row because of the influence of these new rules?
Justin, I said pass on this question. No, I'm kidding. So what I will say is, personally for us, and I did ask my team as well, we are not necessarily seeing a push in that space. And the reason for that is, again, I don't think we're predominantly working with the regulated industry that obviously needs to focus on this. I think the new SEC rules are encouraging and inspiring additional discussions around the fact that we are still nowhere where we need to be in regards to our cyber hygiene and just basic requirements across the board for our risk compliance programs. I think that is going to, in time, probably make people, focus more. But from my perspective, my team's perspective, we haven't necessarily seen that be the driving factor.
Justin, I know you have some thoughts on where you think the market is going, your crystal ball predictions.
So my crystal ball prediction, and don't play the lottery on what I say, is if you're a smaller privately held company with a publicly traded customer and you go to renew your contract and you get a big fat security addendum that says, hey, vendor, if you have a breach, this is what we want. This is how quickly we want it. And we're basically going to hijack your whole incident response process because we might have to make a materiality disclosure to the SEC. I think that's where these smaller companies are going to run into it, because they may not get a renewal of the deal if their hygiene isn't up to speed. And two, they may get a very onerous security addendum that may require them to have to revisit some of these terms, because what I'm seeing is a company will say, well, we need to have all this information and whatnot. And my response is, well, if I give that to you, I've breached my customer contract with about 20 other customers. We simply can't let you have approval over how we handle an incident. That has to be us.
I mean, that absolutely makes sense. And we all know money talks. And I think that in this industry, especially whether it's the insurance market that really pushed a lot of the hygiene components, or right now you're not getting work unless you're SOC 2 compliant, or you're not getting work unless you can provide your WISP and your incident response plan, and you can walk your potential partners through your PCDR. So, these things are going to end up being pushed down. And obviously having that in place preemptively is going to save a lot of headaches. Whether companies do that or not, I guess we'll find out.
That's my take and my crystal ball.
That's your crystal ball.
Yes.
It's back to you.
It's back to
and
me.
So, and your magic numbers for the next Mega Ball lottery is
buy Bitcoin. The halving is in 4 days or 2 days. Anyway, I guess another thing I wanted to ask you about, Svetlana. So I had an IR I handled last year.
An IR?
I'm sorry.
Mr. Acronym.
Yes, I know. See,
just say an event. Just say an event. It's fine.
Our listeners don't see the Post-it notes I get of no acronyms. So maybe we'll have, anyway. So Svetlana, I handled an incident last year where, for whatever reason, the insurance company didn't know which policy to use, and it took them 3 to 4 weeks to get back to us as to what the rates are. And when they came back and we got into it, I told the client, I was like, this is kind of crazy. And so what I wanted to get from your perspective a little bit is, how are you seeing the insurance market and their sensitivity to pricing for the good vendors like PNG is impacting how companies access good incident responders to help them take care of responding to events when they have insurance, because they expect that's why they bought it?
Yes. So what I will say is, and this goes back to, some of your earlier questions about just obtaining a vendor reporting. I think that the partnerships that we have in place with not only outside counsel, but the insurance companies are really valuable, and brokers as well, right? Because they have the ultimate relationship with the insured, and they can kind of direct the conversation and the expectations. And, especially if you sometimes have difficult parties, including MSSPs on a call, they can kind of manage all of that. So I think those are relationships that we need to have, and we need to manage appropriately. I think that the bottoming out of rates for the insurance market is not sustainable. This industry specifically is a lot of hands-on work. It is extremely time consuming. It requires a lot of expertise, a lot of education, a lot of training, a lot of very expensive individuals because they have all of that, right? And so if you want that level of hands-on experience with really competent, qualified individuals who can treat your insured appropriately, I think you have to pay for that value. And so I think there is a pretty great discrepancy in the work that is being performed by some of the larger vendors that have Super Bowl commercials that support Fortune 500 companies versus the mid-sized to smaller businesses that may only be focused on kind of the rate component, and vendors that are making panel specifically because of kind of the negotiated cheaper rates.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. With all the knowledge and all the snafus and incidents that you see, what is your best and favorite cyber tip?
So I'm actually, and I have a lot of tips, but I also asked my team this because I think I probably would have said something along these lines, but not as well. And I had my directors give me 3 tips, and I think they all ultimately mean the same thing. But the first one was trust but verify. The second one, know when to ask for help. And the third one is question everything. And I think ultimately it's the same thing, which is, the trust but verify aspect of it. And ultimately what that means is, just because it's deployed does not mean it's been properly configured, right? Just because it's been rolled out does not mean it's been properly enabled. And so words matter. And Jody, thank you for, correcting us on our acronyms, because this is our, day in, day out of our mouth. And a lot of people don't necessarily know what it means, but words matter because the terminology actually does not mean sometimes what even the client thinks it means, right? So yes, you deployed your endpoint detection and response solution, but did you properly configure it to ensure that it is actually doing what it's supposed to do? yes, you rolled out your MFA, your multi-factor authentication, but did you actually enable it? So now your employees are forced to set it up on every single relevant account, whether it's email or, whatever. So having the appropriate parties in place, not only your internal IT or your outsourced MSSP provider, to be able to vet that and ensure that they enabled log collection. So when you do have a potential incident and we have the necessary artifacts to really be able to ascertain what happened, right? Or the, EDR solution has been properly enabled to ensure that it actually stops the next ransomware attack instead of just sitting on your legacy systems, not doing anything. Having a third party like PNG or, anybody else to be able to go in, confirm these things. And if they hadn't done it, just say, hey, we took care of it. It's been done. Going forward, make sure your, service providers do this going forward, I think is extremely beneficial.
Excellent tips. I even wrote them down.
We're very pithy in the configured, but not.
I like it.
That is good. So, Svetlana, when you're not doing all this cool cyber stuff, what do you like to do for fun?
My favorite hobby is proving people wrong, and that takes a lot of my time, believe it or not. But I love doing that. I also love cooking, spending a lot of time with my fur baby, going on leisurely walks with my early morning coffee. I live in downtown Washington, D.C. I'm very lucky to be here. So now that the really nice weather's coming out, I love running the National Mall, going to the Lincoln Memorial, enjoying the sun, and spending time with my hubby.
Well, we're so grateful that you came and shared all of this great information with us. If people would like to learn more, where should they go?
So PNG Cyber, I will say there's a dash. And the reason there's a dash is because somebody else bought the just regular PNG Cyber without a dash. So png-cyber.com is our website. I am on LinkedIn. I respond to every single LinkedIn message, which is a problem, but feel free to find me, Svetlana Braunscheidel, on LinkedIn and send me a message, and we can swap information. And I can share all the information with the very smart people on my team that actually do the work as well.
Well, thank you again for joining us today.
Thanks, you guys. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks for listening to the She Said Privacy, He Said Security podcast. If you haven't already, be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes and check us out on LinkedIn. See you next time.